Guys, there's a demographic freight train heading towards the US housing market, careening out of control. This freight train, it's unstoppable, it's gaining steam, and when it hits the US housing market, it's going to be bad news. Home values, they're going to go down. Inventory, it's going to go up. And this isn't just going to be a short-term thing. This is going to become a new normal, long-term situation. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the aging of the US population. That's right, guys. The US population is getting old. And it's getting old very, very fast. The number of deaths in America is surging every single year, reaching new highs. The number of births is declining and reaching new lows. And this means that population growth is in a secular decline. In fact, 2020 was the first year in America's history, the first year in America's history where more new housing units were built than the population grew. Think about that. The first time it's ever happened, and it's going to be happening a lot more in the near future. This is, of course, bad for fundamental real estate demand. It means that we're going to see big increases in inventory, big declines in prices going forward. And like I said, this is just simple age demographics. It's unstoppable. So what I'm going to show you guys in this video is the data behind this. We're going to look at specific hard data from the U.S. Census Bureau, analyzing how the demand for U.S. homes is changing by age and what this means for the housing market in the short to long term. You're not going to want to miss this data because literally no one else is talking about this issue, and it's going to change the housing market forever. So let's get into the data. So a lot of you guys out there I know are frustrated, and you get the sense, especially as maybe a younger person or a younger family, it's becoming increasingly difficult to afford a home. Home prices in America today are at all-time highs relative to things like wages, inflation, rent. Home prices have never been more expensive, and that's pricing a lot of people out of the market. Now, what we're seeing is actually a huge shift generationally and by age bracket of who is owning homes in America. So this is where we're going to start with this data. The big surge in home ownership that's occurring among seniors and the decline in home ownership that's occurring among millennials. Guys, and you can see that exemplified on this graph where we're looking at the share of US home ownership broken down by age bracket. And so there's a lot of lines on this graph. It might be a little intimidating, but stick with me. I'm going to explain what it all means. Don't turn away just yet. And what we're looking at here is just, let's say, the 55 to 64-year-old demographic. They own, in 2019, 23% of all the homes in America. We can see that this is up from 19% in 2005. So 55 to 64, they are gaining in terms of their home ownership share. These other blue lines are also gaining. 65 to 74 is in fact the biggest gainer, has gone from being a 12% owner of US homes in 2005 to 19% in 2019. The final one is 75 to 84, has gone from being about an 8% owner back then to a 10% owner today. So we're seeing big gains in these blue lines, big gains in home ownership among 55 to 84-year-old owner households. They are the ones who are propelling housing demand in America right now. The red lines, it's the exact opposite. 45 to 54, kind of this middle-aged Gen X bracket, owned 24% of homes in 2005. They were the number one homeowner. Now they're the number two at 19%. 35 to 44, they owned 21% in 2005. They were number two in 2005, the 35 to 44-year-olds. Now they're 16%, number four. And then we have 25 to 34. They owned 12% of the homes in 2005. Now they only own 9%. And what's interesting is actually 25 to 34 is now below 75 to 84. Guys, can you believe that? More 75 to 84-year-olds own homes in America right now than 25 to 34-year-olds. And this is an absolutely crazy, crazy shift. And it's happening in a very short amount of time, only 15 years. We've seen like 35 to 44-year-olds. They were a huge segment of the housing market 15 years ago. Now they're only number 4. Meanwhile, 65 to 74-year-olds were like a microscopic ownership percentage back 15 years ago. They're soon going to be, in the next couple of years, the number 2 owner of homes in America. So you're seeing a big shift in home ownership from the more millennial to middle-aged demographic to the senior demographic. And this confirms, I think, a lot of the perceptions out there. I know a lot of you guys are saying it seems like the baby boomer generation is taking over the housing market. That is true. They are taking over the housing market. A lot of millennials are being locked out. However, guys, prices aren't the only thing here. right? I think a lot of people suspect that, oh, the reason for this is because high prices mean that millennials can't afford homes and they stay renters. Well, that's definitely happening in certain cases, but actually the bigger issue, more broadly, is simply the aging of the U.S. population. That's right. Regardless of what home prices are, you're going to see this trend continue because the U.S. is getting older. It's going to continue to have more and more 65-year-olds and 75-year-olds and less 25-year-olds. Like, that's just going to continue to happen because birth rates in the U.S. have been plummeting for decades, and they've especially been plummeting over the last 10 years. Meanwhile, the amount of deaths are going up. This is just a trend that's occurring in America. And what this trend fundamentally means is that the growth in real estate demand in the U.S. is coming from seniors. It's coming from seniors. You probably thought I was going to say millennials. No, there's actually zero growth in real estate demand coming from that millennial age bracket. It's all coming from the senior age bracket. Not even just with home ownership, also with renting. All the growth in real estate demand in the U.S. is coming from seniors. And you guys can see that represented on this graph where we're looking at the percentage increase in household formation in America over the last 10 years. And household formation, simply put, that's the sum of owner households and renter households, just the total amount of existing households in America with people living in it. Doesn't include investment properties or vacation properties. It's simply the amount of households, homes, and apartments with people living in it. And you can see very clearly where the increase is coming from. It's this 65 plus demographic. There's been a 30% increase in households among the 65 plus demographic over the last 10 years. That's massive growth. Guys, if you're enjoying the data presented in this video, please make sure to hit that like button. When you do that, it gets me a bit more exposure on YouTube. Actually helps me produce more of these videos in general. So make sure to hit that like button. Additionally, make sure to comment. I want to hear about what your experiences are in the housing market as a renter, as a buyer. What are you seeing out there? When you guys comment, it actually makes these videos more informed and better. All right, guys, let's get back to the video. Now, 45 to 64, it's kind of like that Gen X middle age demographic has seen 0% increase in household formation. 25 to 44 has also seen 0% increase in household formation. So 25 to 44, that's that millennial segment. No growth, no increase in real estate demand in aggregate coming from millennials. And then we actually have under 25, we're seeing a 12% decline in the number of households for people under 25. So this is kind of troubling for the housing market, guys. We're seeing a big decline in young households being formed, and we're seeing no growth in millennial households, but huge surge in senior households. Now, why is this a problem for the housing market? Well, just think about it age-wise. If your demand is coming from the 65 plus demographic, and that's where all the real estate demand is coming from in the US right now, well, that works out well for a while, but the problem with the 65 plus demographic, as we've started to see in the last 5 years, is that they die. Quite simply, they die. The amount of deaths in America is surging over the last 5 to 10 years as we're just now hitting this age segment where our population is aging, and it's going to come with a lot more deaths occurring in America. And deaths are, bad in general, right? Like, you don't want your family members to die, you don't want your friends to die, but it's also bad for the real estate market because when someone dies, they're no longer demanding a home or an apartment. And so we're just scratching the surface of this occurring in America, where our aging population is now leading to more and more of the housing demand being borne by a segment that probably doesn't have much more than 15 to 20 years to live in a lot of cases. And even if they don't die, often they'll go into a nursing home or they'll move in with their adult children, right? And that will also decrease the demand for housing in America. And it's also not just, guys, the age that's also problematic. It's the characteristics of how people are living in these homes. We're seeing a big increase not just in senior demand, we're seeing an increase in seniors living alone. That's actually the biggest increase in household formation as a share is seniors living alone. Meanwhile, not only are we seeing like a flattening in millennial demand, we're seeing a decline in the number of households who are married with kids. Married with kids, that's like the number one segment of someone who would demand a home, want to live in a home. We're seeing a decline in that segment. problematic for the US housing market. So guys, no longer are we just looking at the age segment here. We're looking at kind of the style of the household. So for instance, we can see here, like I said, the biggest increase in household formation has been among living alone 65 plus. That segment has seen a 24% increase in households over the last decade. At the other end of the spectrum, married with kids has experienced a 5% decline in household formation over the last decade. What that means, there are 5% fewer households today married with children than there were 10 years ago. So this is where you got to really stop and think. You hear those arguments about, oh, there's all these millennial families who are waiting to buy a home. Well, we're seeing a huge decline in the fundamental segment that would demand a home, married with kids. You have no bigger impetus to buy a home than when you have a child, and we're seeing a decline in the amount of children. Living alone, under 65, is actually flat. This surprised me. I thought maybe that, like more millennials would be living on their own or something, but no, this is actually flat. And then we see married with no children. That's had a 10% increase. This one's interesting. I think it's due to two things. One, you have younger married couples who are waiting more to have kids, but then you also have older married couples whose kids have now moved out of the house. So you're getting more and more married with no kids households. And this is a problem, is if you don't have children, your impetus to stay in a home is lower, right? You don't need to stay in a home for security and space and all that if you don't have kids, right? You can much more easily sell your house, take the profit, and go rent. So guys, that 65 plus living alone segment, which is by far seeing the most growth, that's problematic for the US housing market. It's a problem because while many of those households are owners now, many will not be owners for long. That segment, it's a lot of widows, especially women whose husbands have died in that segment. Many are going to convert to either living with their adult children as they age, moving into a senior living community, or if they're old enough and sick enough, unfortunately, moving into a nursing home and then eventually dying. And this is just a simple, sad reality of the aging of the US population, is that this is going to happen. Conversely, that married with children decline is a real problem, because if you're thinking about buying a home, right? Like say you're 30 and thinking about buying a home. If you have a kid already or a kid on the way, your desire to buy a home is way higher than if you don't have a kid. If you don't have a kid, you're like, I can rent longer. It's no big deal. If you do have a kid, you're like, I need to buy now so I can get security and space. And it's in this relationship where that argument about millennials that I hear all the time in real estate. So many people try to say, huge millennial demand pool looking to buy. No, this millennial demand pool, while there might be a certain amount of 25 to 44-year-olds, many of them are not fitting the criteria of what a homeowner typically is, which is someone who's married with a kid. And so these two things, living alone 65 plus going up, married with children going down, is going to spell problems for the US housing market going forward. So I think a lot of you might be wondering, okay, Nick, I get what you're saying. I get the trend. What's the timing on this? Because a lot of you, if you're looking to buy a home, right, you might want to understand what the timing is. And I'll say this. The trend has already started. 7 years ago was when really the aging in the US population kicked into high gear. The amount of deaths really started going up. The amount of births started plummeting. So it's already started. And you're already seeing it in certain markets which are a bit older. Certain markets that are a bit older are already seeing issues in their housing markets because of this. However, I don't think you're going to really see the real impact for another 5 years. It's going to be in the next 5 years where the oldest baby boomers, who are now 75, are going to be 80 in 5 years. That's peak age now to enter a nursing home. Average age of a nursing home entry is 79. So I would say in the next 5 years, you're going to start to see this start to increase even more. But by like 2025, 2026, we're going to be full blown in terms of baby boomers exiting the housing market, putting their homes on the market for sale, increasing inventory, decreasing prices. And the real problem here is that there's no way to stop this trend. It's unstoppable. It's aging, right? Average life expectancy in the US peaked 10 years ago. It hasn't increased. And actually, 2/3 of baby boomers are overweight, 1/3 are morbidly obese. We've never actually had an elderly population as unhealthy as our current elderly population. So we're not really extending life expectancy anymore. And that means that as this population gets older, they're going to move out of their homes first into senior living communities, move in with their adult children, nursing homes. That's going to increase home demand. And then they're going to start dying. That's going to really decrease real estate demand. And we're going to enter a new paradigm in the US housing market where like these assumptions of just growth are going to really go away. We're going to see more years like we saw in 2020 where the amount of housing units constructed are going to be higher than population growth. Of course, guys, there's significant differences across the US in how different cities and metros are in their aging curves. Some cities, some metros are way ahead of others in terms of this aging and this reality. Some are already feeling the effects in their real estate market. Like a lot of the areas in the Midwest, which are some of the oldest areas in America, they've had terrible real estate appreciation over the last 20 years. They're basically an indication of what the rest of the US is going to experience over the next 20 years. So we already have an indication with these Midwest cities of what's going to happen for the rest of the country. However, like I said, there's significant differences, and in a future video, I'm going to cover the markets that you need to be most concerned about in terms of this aging trend, and the markets that are going to be releasing the most new housing units into the market due to aging, death, nursing home entrance, etc. I'll be talking about that in a future video because you're going to probably want to start to adjust, especially if you're an investor, you're going to want to start to adjust your investment strategy based on these age demographics on a market by market basis. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that video. I'm going to be posting it in the next couple of weeks. Also make sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. I spent a lot of time putting this data together for you guys. In return, just hit that like button, gets me a bit of exposure, helps me produce more of this content actually. And then also make sure to comment. What are your experiences in the US housing market? What are you seeing as a buyer and renter? I want to hear what you guys are thinking. When you tell me your experiences, it actually makes these videos better. So make sure to comment as well. Guys, also make sure to tune in on Sunday. I have a great video planned for you. We're talking about fact or fiction. Is BlackRock and Wall Street taking over the US housing market? I know you guys have heard a lot about this narrative over the last couple of weeks. Well, on Sunday, we're going to have the data to fundamentally prove whether BlackRock and Wall Street is taking over the US housing market. You're not going to want to miss that one. Until then, this is Nick from Reventure Consulting signing off.